So you've been probably hearing a lot about how the foreign markets have been dictating really how Hollywood has been doing things as far as the way that they're doing stories and the way that they're setting up their characters in order to fit into, let's say, a foreign market's idea of what a Hollywood film should be. Now, one of the big things that I kept hearing before the lead up to Frozen 2 was the fact that Elsa was supposed to be a lesbian character, but they scaled that back because they were afraid of how the Chinese market would deal with it. Now, I haven't seen Frozen 2, so in all likelihood, she could be a lesbian character there, and I wouldn't even really know. Or there could at least be some serious undertones there. But from my understanding, they did tone that back or decided to remove it completely from Frozen 2 because they were afraid of how the foreign markets would react to it, especially China. And so I decided I wanted to see really how important was it for them to appease the foreign markets. How much of the money that a movie sees comes from outside of the USA? So what I did was I went to Box Office Mojo and I just started picking some movies that I thought would kind of demonstrate sort of at least a plethora or a range of movies from different companies, even though there is a heavy leaning towards Disney in this particular list. But I just picked some random ones that came off the top of my head to see how the foreign market really made these movies. And we can tell right off of Jump Street, the one I was talking about here, Frozen 2, you can see that so far, 61.1% of their overall gross is coming from the overseas market. Now, why I think this is important is twofold. Number one, the way that the box office works here in the US could be significantly different than the way that the box office works overseas. And I'll get more into that as we continue on in this video. By the way, if you like the content of this video, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. That would really help go a long way. Now, domestically, you see only 38.9% of the total gross comes from domestic. And Frozen 2 has gone off to a very good start. It is going to be hitting well over $1 billion. And good for them on that particular movie. I haven't seen it yet. I will probably see it months and months and months from now, because that's how I saw the original, months and months afterwards. So let's continue on. We have here The Lion King. This is the live action remake of The Lion King. And as you can tell here, 67.2% of its box office gross came from overseas. Over $1 billion from overseas markets. Its original release was from July 12th to August 21st. It was released in 56 markets. So domestically, 543 million, over $1 billion from overseas markets. That's well over half. So when they say that the Hollywood is catering to the foreign markets, you're starting to see exactly why they are. There is a ton of money to be made overseas. Let's keep looking. Men in Black International. Now, this movie was a bomb. A complete and total bomb. Domestically, it made less than $80 million. Well, it made a little over, $80 million on a budget of $110 million. But look at this. Internationally, the movie made $173 million. So that's 68.5% of its gross overseas. And it was released in 77 different markets. Now, why I think this is also very important is because the way that it works in the US, the longer that a movie is in theaters, the less money the actual studio gets. That's why that first weekend, that's why they really, really want to push you to go to that first weekend, because that's when they're going to be making the most amount of money, and the theater itself will make the least amount of money. So a theater would love to have a movie that is even if it's bringing in less people, it is consistently bringing in people over the long haul, where and towards the back end, they'll be making more money. But the studios, they don't want to do that. They want you to come that first weekend and see that movie. They want to stack that whole thing because that's where they're going to be making the most amount of profit. Now, overseas, with these contracts that they have with these theater chains overseas, where the sort of the rules and the culture are a little bit different than here in the US, that may not be the same case. You see, the theater or the studios could be getting much bigger chunks of money from these theater chains overseas than they would be here in the United States. And so they really, 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 really want to see huge international grosses. And a movie like this one right here, where it only made $80 million domestically over its entire run, $110 million, you really have to double that for it to break even. And it probably, more likely than not, didn't break even because of this really, really low domestic gross, but more so because this international gross, where they probably would have made the most amount of their money, just didn't do it. So you see, there is a true when they say that international box office saves certain movies, it's absolutely true. Because if this number right here, you see how important this, how much of the box office gross really is the overall is that international market. So if this number is huge, then the overall, even if it doesn't make that much here domestically, well, the domestic, you weren't really making that much anyway. This is where you really want to make that money right there. Let's keep looking. Terminator Dark Fate, 75% of its box office came from overseas. And this is a movie that is projected to lose, I think, close to $130 million. This movie right here, $189 million of its $250 million gross came from overseas. Without that money, Terminator Dark Fate would have had a much, much darker fate than what it actually had. Now look at this right here. Even Avengers Endgame, right? They went close to almost $1 billion just here domestically. This budget, $356 million. Look at this. $356 million, and its domestic opening was $357. That is beautiful. Beautiful thing. Internationally, 69.3%. Internationally. Look at that number. Look at that number. $1,939,000,000, almost $2 billion from international box office. Why would they do anything to ruin that? That's why Elsa was not a lesbian in Frozen 2. And now this is a movie here that everyone was talking about because this movie did not play in China. The Joker, great film. The first R-rated film to get to $1 billion on a budget of $55 million. Look at this. Opened at $96 million. But even that movie, Joker, $717 million of its box office came from internationally, 68.5%, for total worldwide gross of $1,048,000,000. Now here's the crazy part. It was only in 43 markets. It didn't play in China. And China is a huge, huge part of these international numbers. If Joker would have played in China, you would have seen this movie make maybe at least another $500 million. Now look at this one. This right here, this is Avatar. Domestically, $760 million. $760 million. International, 72.7%. Now, this was the number one grossing movie in the world at one point. And internationally, it did over $2 billion. Now, remember, Endgame did not break over $2 billion internationally, but it had a much higher domestic gross than Avatar. So that's why it went over on Avatar. Avatar only had 760, where it was 850 for Endgame. Worldwide, $2.7 billion, and that international gross accounted for 72% of its gross. And you wonder why China and why the international market is dictating what Hollywood is doing now. Titanic. This was all the way back in 1997. A movie that made over $2 billion. Now, this movie was in theaters for a super, super ridiculously long time. Look at this. December 18th through May 29th. This movie was in theaters. Theater chains, they loved this movie because it stood in theaters for so long. And they were getting money, just sucking in that money as time went on. But look at this. Internationally, 69.9%, over $1.5 billion coming from that international market. Now, this isn't always the case. Let's look at something like here, like Ford versus Ferrari. This movie is clearly geared towards the American audience. 56.5% of its gross, $81 million, is here, domestically in the US. Only 43.5% from international screenings. This one right here, it's been in release now for 16 days. Now, this could kind of flip as time goes on. You could see it international sort of increase. Right now, it's in 3,500 theaters. I don't see exactly how many international markets it's in. It may not be in every single market quite yet, but right now, this is exactly what you're seeing. It's a little bit under. So every single movie that's out there isn't geared towards the international audience, but you can see in the way that these movies are made, there's a difference. There's less of a sensibility in a movie like Ford versus Ferrari as opposed to an Avengers Endgame, or a movie that's going to be heavily dependent on that international market, where 72% of its total income will be that international market. Here's one more right here. John Wick, Chapter 3, Parabellum. It made $326 million worldwide, which is fantastic. It doesn't actually show what the movie's budget was. You'll probably figure it's around $50 million or somewhere around there. It ran from May 15th to October 4th in 76 markets. Internationally, it did okay. It did $155 million and $171 million domestically. So its domestic gross was much higher internationally. And again, you can see there's a difference in the way that movie is made, that movie's produced, as opposed to some of these other movies that are heavily dependent on that international market. Now, I would like to see right now, really fast, if we could have the original John Wick, just to see if that one. So look at this. The original John Wick was a 50-50 split. So this one was made on a budget of $20 million. So it was a 50-50 split. John Wick 2, you're probably going to see pretty much the same split between the two of them. Yeah, domestically, it does better. So John Wick is a franchise that runs really domestically. Fast and Furious I believe it's an international franchise at this point. The original Fast and Furious was, it was domestically, was a big hit. Internationally, not so much. Let's see, what is it? Fate of the Furious? Let's see if that's changed at all since then. And, oh, wow. Wow. Look at that. Oof. Look at this. 81.7%. $1 billion coming from international markets, and domestically only 226 million. It did not even clear its budget domestically, but international. This is why you're getting Hobbs and Shaw. This is why you're getting a bunch of different Fast 9 and all this stuff, is because that international market is dictating what movies we're going to see. So whenever somebody says to you the international market isn't important, or ask you if the international market is important, show them these numbers, show them to this video, and say absolutely 110% the international market is important to Hollywood, and Hollywood cares less about us than they do about them. They want to get that international money, 110%. And that is the fate of the Hollywood system here in America, bowing down to international interests. And the proof's in the numbers. The proof is absolutely 100% in the numbers. Once again, guys, if you like the content of this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And I hope that you have a good one. I want to hear you down in the comment section, and let me know if China is running Hollywood. Have a great one, guys.